across America. Live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It's the weekend edition. We're so grateful you can join us. We have some very successful opportunities today to talk about, first of all, a very good decision coming down from the Supreme Court, some other cases that are in process, as well as kind of a point-counterpoint today on whether we should end the filibuster in the United States Senate or continue it. Also looking at who's supporting and who's not supporting this war in Iran, a second coming of Doge, a piece on Jews in America, ungracious immigrants, if we can get to all that, because we have quite a number of things to talk about today. Dr. Merrill Matthews with us, as well as Jeff Mateer, who is the Vice President, Chief Legal Counsel for First Liberty Institute. I would imagine most of our listeners, Jeff, are going to hear about this right now, unless they've been out on the news, and that is you've won another case in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, exciting day for us at First Liberty and for our volunteer attorney, Allison Ho at Gibson Dunn, and for our client, evangelist Gabe Olivier. And so this morning, Supreme Court releases opinions, and this morning they released an opinion in our Gabe Olivier case. And I know the listeners are familiar with that case because you all have talked about it often. And the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 that Gabe gets his day in court, that he can proceed with his case. And you'll remember this is the evangelist who was told where he could speak in a public park away from all the people. Go in this corner and you can exercise your First Amendment rights, but nowhere else in the park. And that the case essentially before had said that he couldn't challenge that decision. The Supreme Court has rectified that. So we're obviously at First Liberty, we're very excited on behalf of Gabe and Allison. And it's not every day you win a case at the Supreme Court 9-0.
This is your second one, though, in order that you've won 9-0. Might just point out that I have in front of me here the New York Times article, Supreme Court Allows Street Preachers Lawsuit. And I'd have to say you came off looking really good at the First Liberty Institute from the New York Times.
We often don't quote or share the New York Times. And quite frankly, they often don't get the facts right.
Yes.
But on this one, they've gotten it right, and so we're very pleased with the New York Times on this one.
And for all the notion that there's contention at the Supreme Court, and sometimes there are divided cases. There's there's several cases they do 9-0 on things that come up, and they don't get a lot of attention most of the time. But 9-0 is tough act to beat.
Well, I think it tells you that. And this all starts with 2016, right? And I was going to start by saying, quoting President Trump, who said, are you tired of winning? And we're not tired of winning at First Liberty because we're 11-0 over the last 7 years.
Yes.
And so, but you think about 2016, you think about President Trump winning the first time, being able to put 3 conservatives on the court. And I know that no doubt some of our listeners disagree with some decisions from the U.S. Supreme Court and some of the decisions by those 3 conservatives. But in the area of religious liberty, there is a strong 6 votes. And I think what happens is because you're going if you know you're going to lose 6-3. It pulls the other justices. And today's opinion was written by Justice Kagan. It's a strong opinion.
Alina Kagan, yes.
And I could have like if someone had shown it to me without her name on it, I would have to start guess. Well, maybe this was Kavanaugh. Oh no, maybe it was Barrett. But because Kagan sounds like a conservative in this opinion, and the fact that Jackson joined her. That Sotomayor joined her. That says something, and it's a great sign for religious liberty. It absolutely is a great sign for religious liberty.
Kerby, they've been so successful, you'd almost think they might become a shadow Supreme Court where some school or something's thinking about doing something. Let's go check with First Liberty to see what they say. And if they say this is unconstitutional, then we won't even go through all the expense to doing it.
Well, I hope some of the governments that we send letters to will think that when we tell them they're disobeying the Constitution. Unfortunately, those lower courts and some of the government entities still don't care what the Supreme Court says. But we'll keep fighting in those cases. But this was in my view, a good day for the good guys.
But it costs a lot of money to do that if you're prosecuting one of those things. And so the notion that you'd say First Liberty says we can't do this, let's just go ahead and spend several $100,000 to prosecute this anyway. If that's public money, it's just a waste of money in a sense. If there's a really good chance they're going to lose.
Well, and the best example of that is the Coach Kennedy case, because at the end of the day, the school district had to pay almost $2 million in attorney's fees.
Yeah. What's so interesting is this one was in Mississippi. In a minute, we're going to talk about Connecticut. And, of course, Coach Kennedy was in the state of Washington. But Mississippi, you kind of think of that as a red state. But nevertheless, in that particular community, they gave him a little square area he could stand and preach, but nowhere near people. And that is kind of troubling that it could even happen in a state like Mississippi.
Yeah, and we see this from time to time. And of course, we understand the local politics and local power, that you will get people in power and, they know best and no one can challenge it. And so, what Gabe sought to do and what he was doing, he's an evangelist and he was called to preach and point out sinful behavior. And, some people don't like that if that's interrupting their plan. But, the First Amendment is usually not convenient, right? And, of course, we're all students of history here. And so we know about the English tradition. We know about going to Hyde Park and Speaker's Corner and people being able to speak. And you can't, even if you're offended by the speech. And of course, we say offended, but in Christian language, we would say convicted by the Holy Spirit, right? Usually, if you're convicted by the Holy Spirit, and so it's just another reminder, and that everyone has to follow the Supreme Court's law. Everyone has to follow ultimately the U.S. Constitution.
Well, again, you heard it here, 9-0 last case, 9-0 this case. I do have an article that we'll get to after the break, and that is we've been following another individual, I alluded to it, and that is an individual, Marisol Arroyo Castro, who is an individual who is a teacher and very well-loved and a very gracious individual indeed, but was told that placing a crucifix near her desk was unconstitutional and could cause all sorts of problems, threatened to fire her and all sorts of other things, reassigned later to a non-teaching role. So we got an update on that case. Also one about the Catholic Church. And so we'll cover those real quickly. But then we come back after we cover those briefly. A point counterpoint, a piece by Senator Ron Johnson on to actually end the filibuster, and a piece by our own Dr. Merrill Matthews. The Save America Act isn't worth ending the Senate filibuster. So we'll kind of talk about that because it's one of those big issues right before the U.S. Senate. And you're aware of this because, of course, we have been encouraging you for a couple weeks now to click on that button that says support the SAVE Act, or now the Save America Act, and to contact your senators about that. And you've been watching this unfold right before our very eyes. But what about the filibuster? It's a very good question, and we'll give you kind of a point counterpoint right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Ben Shapiro believes that there is a growing sense of frustration coursing through American politics, and it is no longer confined to one party or ideology. It began with the frustration over the pandemic, politics, and the fears of artificial intelligence, but he argues it has mutated into something darker, nihilism. Now, this form of nihilism, he explains, is built on an enormous lie. It tells people that America's problems are unsolvable, that their personal struggles are not the result of bad decisions, bad luck, or even fixable structural flaws, but an all-encompassing evil system. Now, if you accept that view of the world, it can be debilitating. It short-circuits thought and discourages effort. Why try to make your life better if the system is rigged against you? If you believe the system is rigged, then you need to tear it down. This nihilism is likely the source of today's radicalism. Now, one Washington Post reporter noticed that if you read the manifestos of many of the killers, you will see that they have a contempt for humanity. They didn't act out because they were liberal or conservative, Antifa or white supremacist. In the 19th century, Fyodor Dostoevsky captured this phenomenon. He described the human impulse to reject reason, order, and even self-interest simply to assert independence. Strip people of the belief that they have meaningful choices, and they will lash out. Not despite the destruction that follows, but because of it. Now, we shouldn't be surprised that this worldview is prevalent in a society that rejects biblical morality and believes we are merely a product of blind forces that brought our species into being. The obvious antidote is a biblical worldview and the power of the gospel. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we're going to get into the issue of the filibuster in just a minute, but I thought I'd come back to Jeff Mateer for just another few minutes because we have our Connecticut teacher and the crucifix and also a Catholic church, and these are two other cases you've been following, and since now Gabe Olivier has had his day in court, and that looks like a very positive action, not only for him, but nationwide. But meanwhile, you have, of course, this wonderful teacher in Connecticut who said, you can't keep a crucifix, it's not even that big, next to your desk. And again, it's just hard to even believe.
No, it's one of those, and especially in light of the Coach Kennedy case, which said that a coach could pray at midfield at the conclusion of a football game. And in that one, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3. We didn't get a unanimous. We don't get all our cases unanimous. We ruled 6-3 in favor of Coach Kennedy. And really, this is Ms. Castro's case is similar because she's not saying or doing anything. Simply for 10 years, and I think that gets lost. First of all, she's been a teacher for 32 years. But of those, for 10 years, she had this crucifix next to her desk, and no issues, no one complained. And then an overzealous school administrator sees it and tells her, well, you can keep it in your classroom, but put it in the drawer, put it under the desk, of course, for no one to see. And I mean, that is exactly what they told Coach Kennedy. Like, well, if you want to pray, go pray in the corner. Yeah. And we hope the Second Circuit will get it right. But if not, maybe this is the 12th, or by then maybe the 14th First Liberty victory at the Supreme Court. But it's you don't have to check your constitutional rights at the door, and Christians shouldn't be treated as second-class citizens. The fact that other teachers are able to display their items. And so one has I know what this is, a Yoda, because I know, but apparently there's now something called Baby Yoda.
There is.
So they've got Baby Yodas.
Baby Yodas.
And
I'm sure they have gay flags and all sorts of stuff.
And a Wonder Woman image is okay, which I'm not sure I'd want my children to see. A Wonder Woman image, if I remember that correctly. Maybe it's changed over the years. And
she was Princess Diana before she became Wonder Woman. I know.
Is that right? Okay. Well, I was thinking back to the Wonder Woman series with Linda Carter.
Oh, yeah.
And that will really test some people's memories.
Got a lot of teenage boys watching that.
But I think I was one of them. And then the other thing, they allow sports pens, so you can have a poster of Tom Brady, but you can't have Jesus on a cross. And so I'm we're hopeful that the Second Circuit, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, will do the right thing, but that's why there's a Supreme Court, as we learned today.
Well, again, if you'd like to see the cross, just click on it. It says A Teacher's Cross to Bear. You can see it. You can see the video and all of that. We do have that first article there. And just real quickly, I thought I'd mention another one you're following. This gets back to just, again, property rights. Can a church on its own property build a building? Apparently not.
Apparently not. Not in Pennsylvania. No, it's just crazy. Again, this church owns a piece of property and wants to build a grotto. And it's just like, no, you can't. The city, using its land use authority, and actually, incredibly, they've argued They didn't even know there was a federal law that prohibits them from discriminating against churches. That's the first point. The second point is, well, we don't think that applies to us. Well, are you part of these United States of America? And federal laws apply to you. And so this is one. Again, a church has has plenty of property. It wants to build something. They don't like what they're building. But, I mean, obviously, I thought that's like we had a war. I mean, I thought, that the king, and there's not an established church, and the government doesn't get to tell churches how to worship. And that's exactly what this case is about.
Well, again, you can find some of that, but I know some people wanted to hear how we're going to do with the filibuster. So the first article is by Ron Johnson, and he first of all talks about finances, about how the federal government can't seem to pass a budget, has a 96.7% failure rate. And owing to that dysfunction, he says in the past 15 years, we've had 5 shutdowns, relied on 57 continuing resolutions to fund government on an interim basis, and of course, increased or suspended the debt ceiling dozens of times and all that. So after talking about the financial issues, he says, I do admit that the 60-vote cloture threshold has prevented many bad bills from becoming law. And without it, bad bills would have become law, but it also prevents good bills from being passed and reminds us that if you go back to 1917, up until then, you didn't even have a cloture rule.
Right.
That was started in Senate Rule 22, which is a way of ending debate. But he says lawmakers routinely use the cloture vote today to snuff out discussion and thoughtful consideration of proposed amendments. And some have suggested a talking filibuster, which hasn't really been pursued too much. And as a result, there we are. And so the argument that Ron Johnson makes, and it may be the only really very compelling one, is we need to end the filibuster now before the Democrats do in the first place. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, the best argument out of his piece. Dr. Merrill Matthews, you have 2 pages here to all the reasons why we shouldn't end the Senate filibuster.
Indeed. And I have been hearing from Republicans all the way back to 2016, some of them saying we need to end the filibuster because Democrats are going to do it when they're in control. They didn't do it when they were in control. They missed by 2 votes. Generally, they want to say now, well, those 2 people are gone, so they would be able to do it. I think there were probably more Democrats who were unwilling to end the filibuster, but because they had the 2 who were standing firm, they could say, yeah, I'm for ending the filibuster and not get the grief that they would have gotten otherwise. And I think it's also the case right now. You've got 5 Republicans who said they will not end the filibuster. So John Cornyn, senator from Texas, has come out and said he's for ending the filibuster. Ron Johnson has come out. I think those are, I don't want to say throwaway op-eds, but in a sense, I can come out and please President Trump and please the MAGA element without actually having to end the filibuster. So anyway, I think that's part of what's going on there. But the point that they want to make is Democrats will do that next time. I'm not sure that's the case, but I'm sure if we end the filibuster, Democrats will do certain things. Even if you end the filibuster to pass the Save America Act, next time Democrats are in control of the House and the Senate, and the White House and the Senate, which could be 2029, they could turn around and pass the John Lewis, the John Lewis Act, which we thought was a terrible act. Yeah. So they could end it just on that vote. They could pack the Supreme Court, as they were trying to do during the Biden administration. They could do a number of things that we would wish the filibuster was still there. But the thing I want to point out is the reason this has so much emphasis right now is because Donald Trump is pushing it, because he said the 2020 election was stolen from him, and now he wants to make the case that hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants will vote for Democrats. And I say in the piece, if there was any evidence that that was the case, maybe you would consider it. But there's just no evidence that illegal immigrants vote in any large numbers. Several states have gone and done a clean search through their voter rolls. They find maybe a handful, 10 or 15 people out of millions in that state. I was talking to a person from Utah yesterday. Utah is a mail-in ballot. They did theirs. They found one illegal immigrant who had registered to vote but did not vote. Just one. And so the point I want, and even right now, if you follow the news, illegal immigrants tend to be reluctant to even come out of the house because of the deportation that's going on.
That's true.
The notion that they would go to the polls, take that risk, try to pass the gauntlet to be able to vote for the benefit of being able to cast one vote in a election where thousands of people make a difference in who wins, it's just not worth the benefit for it. So there is fraud in voting. There would be some, we would find some, but you can go to Ken Paxton's website where he looks at the people he's prosecuted for illegal voting. So it's just a handful. You can go to the Heritage Foundation and look at their website where they track prosecutions against people who voted election fraud. You'll find cases, but it's usually 1, 2, 3 people. Sometimes you'll have somebody who works at a nursing home and maybe they send in 10 or 15 or 20 forms for people there that are fraud. But for the most part, it's a very, very small number. So I just don't think the reason he's trying to do this actually will make a difference. And I'll just point out that the polls right now, the generic Democratic or the generic congressional polls show Democrats winning by about 5 or 6 points. That could change. But with the war and other things, I don't expect it to change a lot.
Yeah, and I love your first line of your piece. Well, first, because I'm a fan of Calvin Coolidge.
Calvin Coolidge.
But I absolutely agree with the principle that it's better to kill bad bills. It's more important to kill bad bills than it is to pass good ones.
Well, again, we need to take a break, but if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
Data reveals that more Americans are interested in reading the Bible again, but they also have difficulty applying what they read to contemporary issues. That's because most Americans don't actually hold a biblical worldview, even if they identify as Christians. A biblical worldview understands that the Bible holds the truth, and that truth illuminates every part of life, including every current problem that we worry about today. Point of View's Truth Team has helped Americans make sense of complicated contemporary issues in light of biblical truth for over 50 years. And next week, starting March 23rd, Point of View will be highlighting the impact that you can have when you join the Truth Team. Help Americans find truth and live by it. Learn more by visiting pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
In studio with me, Jeff Mateer, Merrill Matthews. If you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212, talking about the filibuster. And, of course, we have posted, this is our second, or no, I guess it's our third article by Dr. Merrill Matthews. We have one by Ron Johnson of Ending the Filibuster, one by Merrill Matthews, Not Worth Ending This Filibuster. But, Jeff, let me come to you, because in addition to all the political issues, what if indeed we don't have a filibuster, what kinds of bills and legislation might make their way through, like the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and a number of others. I think there's some constitutional issues, because the Save America Act also wants to ban mail-in ballots, and that's the purview of the United States states, not the United States government. True?
Yeah, I mean, pursuant to the Constitution and historically, I mean, throughout our nation's history, elections and the way elections are conducted are based upon state law and states control. And so, for instance, one of the big provisions of the SAVE Act is voter photo ID. It's hard to say that. Photo ID for voters. And Texas, we have that because the Texas legislature, in its wisdom, decided that in the allegations that there was voter fraud occurring, and look, there's some of it occurring, maybe not to the extent that some say, but there is some fraud occurs.
Absolutely.
So it's a very good, and obviously we all know the basic argument. You go to the airport, you got to show your ID. You go into a courthouse, you got to show your ID. Why not show your ID while you vote? Those are all great policy arguments, but those are arguments that need to be made at the state level. Mm-hmm. And so, and many states have some forms of protection for identification in voting. And I think that really the way the Constitution has set up is that those are state issues. States run their elections, and as conservatives, we want the power closer to the people. We don't want the power in Washington. So I think there's a legitimate question about, is this a state's issue versus a federal issue, and then you put on top of that, is it worth blowing up the whole filibuster system, which again I think has saved us from a lot of really bad laws. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Matthews mentioned a few. The other one that I think conservatives and specifically Christian conservatives should be concerned about, but for the filibuster, the Equality Act would have in all likelihood passed, and the Equality Act would have completely ripped rights away from Christian Americans. And one of the laws that we rely upon in a lot of our cases is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which gives strong religious liberty rights against the federal government. And that law, the Equality Act, would have limited the ability to assert the protections of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And again, without the filibuster, that goes away. And at First Liberty, we fought really hard about an issue that Dr. Matthews mentioned, which is court packing. Look, that is a real threat. Mm-hmm. And if the Democrats if there is not a protection of the filibuster and the Democrats get back in control, they are going to pack the United States Supreme Court. And we won't get a 9-0 decision because they'll make sure they get the votes in order. And so I don't know if that means an 18-person Supreme Court. Now, what I suspect is the liberals would vote different. But if you add 6 more people to the Supreme Court, then a lot of our rights go away. And so, I mean, that's my biggest one. I think, I think the SAVE Act, the Save America Act, I think the goals may be good, but I think that the power, where the authority rests, is the states, and those are issues that should be addressed in the states. But my biggest concern is, and I wanted to come here and disagree with Dr. Matthews, but I can't. We'll find an issue that we disagree on at some point, but it's not this one. That we need, and I get the argument. Oh, if we don't do it, the Democrats are going to do it. Well, that may be true, but boy, we would have. We certainly know that if we take it away, they're not going to put it back.
Right. And there was one where the Democrats did do it. That is, they eliminated the filibuster against nominations, but excluded the Supreme Court. Yeah. And then so when Republicans were in charge, they said, all right, we'll see your vote and we'll do one better and we'll eliminate for the Supreme Court, which got us 3 strong justices. Having said that, there is a difference. So somebody might say, well, we eliminated the filibuster for those, so why is this any different? Because with nominations, but especially the Supreme Court, once you vote on it, it's essentially done. I mean, you can't get that back unless you impeach the people. Right. But once you vote, if you pass the Save America Act, Democrats take control again in 2029, they can come up and just repeal the Save America Act and do something else. We were almost able to do that with repealing Obamacare, and the only reason they got Obamacare passed is because they rolled Senator Kennedy into on his death wheelchair into the Senate to make the 60th vote to get it through the Senate. Otherwise, they would have never gotten except for that. And then after that, Scott Brown came in from Massachusetts. And he said, I will be the one that will kill that. And then the House had to go through some machinations to get it passed anyway. But it's because we're a very divided country right now. The notion that you have something that stops bad legislation going through, I think, is really important. If you had a country that was almost all red or almost all blue, it might not make a difference because then you'd have the Senate with 60 60 votes. But as long as you're fairly divided, it forces you to have to say either we're going to go visit with the other party to try to see what we can work out, which is a compromise, or we're just going to sit and stay stymied. And they may stay stymied, as they're doing on the passing legislation to fund Department of Homeland Security.
One of the aspects of this whole polarization is illustrated by the comments, and I'll just pick on two senators here. First of all, Chuck Schumer is convinced that this particular piece of legislation, the SAVE Act or the Save America Act, is Jim Crow 2.0. On the other hand, I'd pick on a Republican who we've had on the program, Mike Lee, who says if we don't pass the Save America Act, we will lose every election in the future. I think both of these are off the chart, aren't they?
Donald Trump won in 2024 without the Save America Act.
But you're getting those kind of hyperbole in some ways you would not have guessed. He will say he won by the largest majority
ever and took almost everybody. So that was hyperbole, but it's because he didn't even get 50%. It just, I think it's 49.8%. But Republicans did well in that.
And so, again, you're just getting these kind of comments, and we're sort of losing our minds in some of that. So, nevertheless, I did put filibuster on there, but I wanted to move on to our next one because one of our callers wants to get into what's going on in Iran. And I've posted this piece here with Noah Rothman. Pre-war world is gone. But one of the things that's kind of interesting is that if you watch CNN, there's a very enthusiastic young man there. If you've ever watched him when he's got the polls up there, and he shows if they're MAGA, 100%. So there's been kind of this argument right now that when we look at the war in Iran, that Donald Trump has lost his base. And as far as I can tell, CNN saying, no, he hasn't, right?
Yeah, there have been some discussions, and he's lost some people, Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, but those are worth losing.
Goodbye. Let me show you the door. You can come back when we tell you to come back.
So I would argue he's lost some people. I think the 100% is probably a little over the top.
But still.
Because I think there are more people. However, Donald Trump's base, the MAGA base, is really it's what, maybe 25 or 30% of the public. The general polls on what the public thinks, and that's what you've got to worry about going into November, is roughly about 56% oppose the war, and that's what ought to be concerning the Republicans right now. Not that the fact that they have something close to 100% who support it.
Yes, and again, Harry Enton is his name. He says there's no break in MAGA. Trump's approval is 100%. And then he goes on to say, well, 90% of MAGA Republicans approve of U.S. military in Iran. But one of the arguments here by Noah Rothman is you'd be hard-pressed to find a poll in which self-described MAGA voters are not foursquare behind this war, a subset of the larger Republican or Republican-leaning voter base. But when we come back, since some of our calls want to get into what's going on in Iran, we've been talking about it all week. I'd love to get your thoughts about it. And one of the callers wants to talk about the connection to China, because we have, of course, the Strait of Hormuz. We have China, we have India, we have Japan, many of them depending on the oil. Are we going to open up the Strait of Hormuz enough so that we're back to normal? Some really good questions that we'll put on the table. And if you'd like to join us on that conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I suspect most of you probably agree that filibuster isn't something we need to change right now, but I wanted to give you a point counterpoint, and you can read both of those on the website at pointofview.net. The one I'm mentioning at the moment by Noah Rothman, the pre-war world is gone. That's true in a lot of senses, but we'll get into that a little bit later, and then we'll get into some other issues along the way. Lots of things to cover today. If you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Planned Parenthood affiliates are getting creative in the face of the loss of taxpayer funding. In a 6-3 decision last June, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that states can exclude Planned Parenthood from their Medicaid programs on the basis that the organization provides abortions. This imperils the organization's presence in conservative states. Soon thereafter, Congress passed and the President signed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which bars Medicaid funding for tax-exempt organizations that perform abortions. For decades, federal law has almost completely banned federal federal funding of abortion. But the new legislation prevents Medicaid funds from going to groups that provide contraception and other services if they also perform abortions and receive more than $800,000 Medicaid dollars annually. Chief among these organizations is Planned Parenthood. Reporting a $100 million revenue gap, Planned Parenthood's national office has laid off staff and closed 50 clinics last year, many in states with permissive abortion laws. The Wall Street Journal reports that in an effort to keep the doors open, the organization's largest affiliate, Planned Parenthood Mar Monte, which operates clinics in Northern California and Nevada, is overhauling its business model with a slate of new services. The clinics are now offering Botox injections and IV hydration. They're looking at adding laser hair removal and cosmetic filler treatments. Mar Monte leaders told the Journal these added services fit with a larger mission of promoting bodily autonomy. Patients pay cash for these aesthetic treatments. The clinics can charge significantly less than your typical med spa and still make a nice profit. They don't need cushy surroundings. Ladies can get their hydration IVs in the same recliners where patients recover from having a pregnancy terminated. Mar Monte leaders told the Journal they hope these unconventional offerings, such as Botox and lip and cheek fillers, will generate enough revenue to subsidize the health care Planned Parenthood is best known for. That would be abortion. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Jeff Mateer and Merrill Matthews. And let's, we can go to our first caller here. And having trouble getting that to come on. Here we go. What are we doing wrong? Kathy, are you on? No, I'm having trouble getting her on the air. So if somebody can help me out, that would be great, because we would love to hear her comments. But at the moment, not. There we go. Thank you. Kathy, go ahead. Do we have Kathy? Or maybe we don't have Kathy. Maybe that's our problem. Put it on hold. Try again. Well, the question was about China and what's going on with Iran. Anybody want to help us out with that one?
Well, there have been comments that this is good for China and that it's bad for China, and there have been several different explanations as to why it might be good for China and other places why it might be bad for China, because China's watching this, and if you're China and you're thinking about invading Taiwan, and you're looking at us getting bogged down a little bit here, and plus using so many of our munitions here that we're going to have to go get more munitions. The president had people from some of the weapons manufacturing companies in, was I think in Monday this week, encouraging them to start producing more and saying we're going to get the funding for that and so forth. If you're China, you may say this might be an easier task than we think. Plus, they are allowing apparently oil going to China through the Strait of Hormuz. There have been some ships that are allowed to go through. So China is apparently getting its oil. China also has expanded its renewable energy significantly. Even though they're large users of oil and natural gas, they wouldn't be as bound to it as they might be without the renewable energy. But China is also looking at trying to help negotiate some of these things and trying to become sort of the bigger country that can try to work out some kind of peace. So you could see it hurting China, or you could see it helping them. And I don't know, when war starts, you don't know how things are going to play out.
Well, that seems to be one of the big issues, is that if you have an exit strategy, what's the exit strategy? Is that we bomb them and leave, or we bomb them and see where we're going, and a variety of issues like that. Those, I think, are different situations, and that's one of the reasons why the press is asking, well, what's the next step?
That's right. And, of course, initially they said no boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And now we've got a 2,200 Marine Expeditionary Force going over there with, and I saw today, some thought that they might put the Marines in the Strait of Hormuz on the banks there to try to stop the Iranians from attacking ships going through. Also possibly putting them on the island called Hark, I believe it is. And going back to the issue of MAGA people, I noticed in Noah Rothman's piece, he says in there that that MAGA is what President Trump says it is. And when the war started, I heard a lot of MAGA people saying, we are not putting troops on the ground. This is not going to hurt us. Now that he's thinking about it, I think you'll almost certainly hear people coming out saying, absolutely, we need to put the MAGA people, we need to put troops on the ground because that's what needs to be done. And I'm behind Trump 100% on that.
Any thoughts?
No, I think yes, I think most of MAGA, well, whatever the president says is what they follow and say, and will agree with, even if his prior statements were contradictory. But I do believe, I mean, on this one, actually, I think I agree with the administration. I think they're going to have to secure. They're going to have to secure it. I think the Saudis today, I saw a piece. The Saudis are saying that I mean, if it's not secured, that the price of a barrel of oil could go up to $180 a barrel.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be, you talk about, and going into a midterm election and gas prices at what? $4-5 that's here in Texas. In California, they'll be like, what, $20 or something a gallon with all the taxes they have on gas out there. But I think they're going, look, we're in. And so, 1 foot in, what's the old expression? One foot in,
1 foot out.
We got to be in. We got
1 foot on 1 foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel is what we used
that's
to say.
That's a different one.
That's a different one. I think we have Kathy now. Kathy, go ahead.
Yes. I have been listening to China in Focus. It's a news. It's an independent, uncensored. Well, anyways, the point is Tiffany Myers, who had the American Thought Leader, one of the people on that, had an interview with Gordon Chang.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I guess apparently, according to Gordon Chang, in Venezuela, the reason why we went into there, because of cheap oil, but not only that, China has been surveilling us from there.
Yes.
And Cuba, and sending that information to Iran, which is affecting our military bases over in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why Trump also is allowing China to get their oil, because they depend on oil to run their economy. And they're having problems with their people, and Cuba's having problems with their people. And apparently the thought is that if they continue to get their oil, this was 8 months back that I found, that China wouldn't bother, Iran wouldn't bother China in that, because he knows that they need the oil.
Yeah, China is China's top source of oil is Iran. They work closely together as they do with Russia. And you mentioned about the surveillance. Russia is now apparently or reportedly giving the Iranians intelligence about where our positions are, even as we are relaxing the sanctions on Russian oil. And I saw a note today that Trump is thinking about relaxing the sanctions on Iranian oil, so that they can make more for it and get. I'm mystified by some of these things, because if you relax the sanctions on Russian oil, then Russia's able to sell it at windfall profits. Putin's already talking about how this is going to be great for their war in Ukraine, and you sit there and think, I don't understand some of these machinations that are going on.
By the way, she did mention Gordon Chang, and we do have him coming on. As a matter of fact, he will be on actually in less than 2 weeks, because next week is our Truth Team week, but then the week after we will have him on, and I'm sure he will fill us in. But there is something that has been said about the fact that if indeed you feel that there's going to be a conflict someday between the United States and China, dealing with some of the things in your backyard, Cuba and Venezuela, dealing with some things that are a problem internationally, like Iran, maybe there's some things you want to take care of first of all.
I agree. And if we were able to take care of Iran the way we did with Venezuela, then it would make more sense. But this has gotten to be a much bigger deal, and I think it's going to be hard to, if we want to get regime change, it's going to be hard to do it without putting people in the sight on the ground to be able to clean out some of that. So if we do that, it becomes a much longer, more protracted war, or else Trump can at some point just claim victory and then walk away and say we won, and we just already said a few times, and you just move on.
Yeah. Well, we need to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some other issues. I will take some more phone calls. Just had a little problem with the phones, as you probably picked up. But as we go to the break, let me just mention that, first of all, we, of course, have our Take Action item. If you do want to still send any notes or comments to our U.S. senators, that is certainly a possibility. My Viewpoints commentary today is on nihilism. That's based on a very good piece by Ben Shapiro, in which he says, in some respects, some of the sense of frustration and even the anger and all of that isn't necessarily confined to one party or another, just kind of this whole idea that all these problems are too big and unsolvable. And I thought you might like to see that piece that he's talking about as well. And of course, as I just mentioned a minute ago, next week is our Truth Team Week. And of course, we have a banner there because we hope that you will consider what you might do to support this ministry as we continue on with all the kinds of news, information, and commentary we provide every day. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls. We can solve all our phone issues. That coming up right after this.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. Across America, live, this is Point of View. Now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Jeff Mateer and Merrill Matthews. Thought we'd get back to, as we were talking about the filibuster and some of these other issues, take another phone call. We'll go to South Carolina, listening on the Good News Network. Daniel, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. Daniel,
hey,
go ahead.
Yeah, just two things. One, I've been hearing this a lot. Sometimes it sounds a little condescending to think that mega people just endorse everything Trump does. I mean, he could be more pro-life.
Yep.
I feel like he could have done a lot more things pro-Israel earlier on.
Yes.
But, there is that. Now, the other thing is with this stealing the election thing, I mean, what about when you had Dinesh D'Souza on and he did all his stuff and proved how many votes were being stolen, you know?
Yeah, Dinesh D'Souza has apologized for that.
Really?
It is, yeah. The movie, was it 2,000 Mules? I think it was.
Yeah.
Yes, he took footage that was not part of that election, and the Wall Street Journal has had an editorial on it. Dinesh has had to step up and apologize for basically putting out false information there. And you can Google that and find that.
I'm hoping that wasn't intentional then. But maybe it was, huh?
We'll get him on again, and we'll
Anyway.
let him explain that.
Yeah.
But back to the point, you are hearing different things. I think you're raising a good question because, on the one hand, there were a lot more people voting for Joe Biden than before, and I think a lot of that has to do with just the mail-in ballots and all sorts of things like that. And, of course, there are also examples of voter fraud. As a matter of fact, if you want to find a very good piece, came out by Newt Gingrich the other day in which he documented some very classic cases of voter fraud, Tammany Hall, and even the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the rest. So nobody
Lyndon
denies. Yeah, Lyndon Johnson, landslide Lyndon.
Star County in Texas.
Yes, and all of that voting. Matter of fact, one of the precincts voted to him in perfect alphabetical order. So obviously there are those frauds.
Yes.
And you've had John Fund on the program. I've had Hans von Spakowski on. They've written books on voter fraud. So we're not saying it doesn't happen, but the bottom line is that in many cases, once the prosecutions have taken place, it made some differences in some of the local elections, or if we have a really close election,
really
like a
close.
presidential election, makes a difference. And I'd love to get your comments, Jeff, because you used to work in the Attorney General's office, and for a while they were prosecuting anybody that was engaged in voter fraud. And that's, I think, an important issue because lots of times local communities don't prosecute because it's just too time-consuming, and many times it doesn't change the election anyway.
I think what my experience is, it does exist. I mean, I think anybody who says that voter fraud does not exist is just doesn't have the facts before them. But it doesn't. We've never seen evidence that it's widespread. I mean, there have been allegations, things like going into computers and changing things and causing results. And we had some of those allegations in Texas in the past few years, and they were investigated, and they just could never show that, for instance, the Russians or the Ukrainians or the Chinese were somehow going into our systems and changing votes.
Right. And the allegation was they were going into Dominion voting machines and to Smartmatic, and that if I voted for Trump, it somehow shifted it to Biden. Fox News paid Dominion voting systems $787 million in their claim against them because of Dominion filed suit on essentially false claims. Sidney Powell, who is sort of the leader of this, an attorney, very smart woman, at least I was when I knew her, when she submitted, because Dominion sued her also, in her admission for summary dismissal, her argument was everybody knows that in elections, people make claims, exaggerated claims that nobody really believes. And I thought, so your argument for claiming that a multi-billion-dollar company was hacked by, worked with Iran, Venezuela, and China to change hundreds of thousands of votes, your argument is you were just making some claims that bogus claims that were exaggerated. That's your argument. So but I also point out in the piece that I have on the Hill that they have the polls for Joe Biden going into 2020 about 6, 7, 8 points. Most of them, all the polls were they were widely for him. But interestingly, Alyssa Farah, who was Trump's communications director, came out after the election and said that their internal polling mirrored the election results except for Georgia. She said, we thought we were going to win Georgia, but Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, we all knew we were going to lose those. So it's just interesting because they've never been able to prove it, and Trump has made several claims that he's getting ready to release the information that's going to prove it was stolen, but he's never done it. And I don't think we'll ever hear anything that proves it.
Well, and again, sometimes when you get involved in a debate, you did this at moot court and things like that, who has the burden of proof? If you're going to argue that there was a stolen election, then you have, I think, the burden of proof. And we've been looking for some of that, and I would love if we could, at some point, even interview some of the people that believe that they've got the best evidence, because I have no hesitation at all about covering that. But like you said, we keep waiting for it to come out, and we've been waiting really since about 2000 for some of these.
We have, and when Sidney Powell came out and said, we've got the Kraken, we're going to show all this fraud, we were here on Point of View, and I said, whoa, all right, I'm ready to see this. But we've just never seen it. And when if they produce it, then I'll believe it. But until then, I think you got to be skeptical.
And again, we were waiting for 2000. That was, of course, Al Gore and George W. Bush. In 2020, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. If anybody has it, we would love to see it for sure. I do have a comment or two. I wonder if we can put Scott on the line there. He had a question about the filibuster. Scott, go ahead.
Hey, I was just wondering if the filibuster that we have today, is that something that was put in place by the Founding Fathers?
The Senate, in its initial rules, never had any provision that limits debates. The House does. They have a rules meeting where they decide how long they're going to debate things. The Senate didn't. So they could debate for as long as they want to. They did not use it that much. They did use it occasionally through the 1800s. But by 1917, President Woodrow Wilson was getting, he wanted to have some votes on the war, and he was tired of the extended debate. So he moved for a limit to debate, a cloture vote, which became Senate Rule 22, and that's where we first got the cloture votes. It's changed a little bit over the years, but you can still talk as long as you want to. Rand Paul and Cory Booker have both done that. They can take the floor and talk as long as they want to.
And Ted Cruz did.
Ted Cruz did as well.
I might just mention, for people that would like to read a little bit more about that, Dr. Merrill Matthews' piece, when you get to the second paragraph, he talks about some of the history of the filibuster and when that was closed down in 1917 by the cloture vote, Senate Rule 22 and all that. So that is the case. If you just tuned in, you're going, one minute you're talking about Iran, the next minute you're talking about filibusters, the next minute you're talking about votes. Well, yes, that's because that was all from the first hour. But in this second hour, we're going to get into a couple other issues. I put this one up primarily for Dr. Merrill Matthews, the second coming of Doge. And we'll get into that in just a minute. That's a piece by Cal Thomas. We have some other things dealing with everything from anti-Semitism and Ungracious Immigrants by Victor Davis Hanson. So we have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Ben Shapiro believes that there is a growing sense of frustration coursing through American politics, and it is no longer confined to one party or ideology. He began with the frustration over the pandemic, politics, and the fears of artificial intelligence, but he argues it has mutated into something darker, nihilism. Now, this form of nihilism, he explains, is built on an enormous lie. It tells people that America's problems are unsolvable, that their personal struggles are not the result of bad decisions, bad luck, or even fixable structural flaws, but an all-encompassing evil system. Now, if you accept that view of the world, it can be debilitating. It short-circuits thought and discourages effort. Why try to make your life better if the system is rigged against you? If you believe the system is rigged, then you need to tear it down. This nihilism is likely the source of today's radicalism. Now, one Washington Post reporter noticed that if you read the manifestos of many of the killers, you will see that they have a contempt for humanity. They didn't act out because they were liberal or conservative, Antifa or white supremacist. In the 19th century, Fyodor Dostoevsky captured this phenomenon. He described the human impulse to reject reason, order, and even self-interest simply to assert independence. Strip people of the belief that they have meaningful choices, and they will lash out. Not despite the destruction that follows, but because of it. Now, we shouldn't be surprised that this worldview is prevalent in a society that rejects biblical morality and believes we are merely a product of blind forces that brought our species into being. The obvious antidote is a biblical worldview and the power of the gospel. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we'll take some phone calls in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. In studio with us today, Jeff Mateer and Merrill Matthews. But I thought for just a minute I'd put one more issue on the table. A piece by Cal Thomas, The Second Coming of Doge. What he means is that there is a task force created by an executive order by President Trump, headed by Vice President J.D. Vance, in an effort to try to trim the budget. Now, if you have paid attention to this article that came out a couple of months ago from the New York Times, they have pointed out that when they looked at the 40 biggest claims on the Doge list and found that only about 12 of them were accurate, 38 of them were not. Now, to be fair, some of the largest cuts were in the Defense Department, but they're supposedly cut, but they're still alive. Some of the biggest cuts would be in entitlements, but they weren't allowed to touch those. You had some that were double counted, where they had the same Department of Energy grant cut twice. But the point I'm making is that we now are at $39 trillion of national debt. The deficit over the last 6 months has been $1 trillion. And remember the reaction at the time when, if you really look back at this, these were just like a small nick in the overall budget of the federal government. And remember, there were people in the streets. You would think that these were massive draconian cuts. There were marches in the streets. There were people that had Tesla cars that were getting beat up because of Elon Musk. And when you go back and look at it, none of that was cut at all. And all the hue and cry that came from that would make you think that we were actually doing something. Unfortunately, we didn't.
Virtually all of the entitlement programs are continuing to grow. They may be growing at a slightly slower pace, but they are, and this is Medicaid. Medicaid was the big one that you got so much uproar on because of the Republicans saying we're going to allow people to work, that you have to work to be able to get benefits and other things. And people were just outraged at this because during the pandemic, we vastly increased Medicaid from about 70 million up to about 95 million people on there. They expanded it. They were just trying to get it back down to traditional Medicaid, and that was a real problem for people who were talking about all the people that are going to be hurt. Same thing true with Obamacare, with cutting some of the subsidies, the enhanced subsidies. So they have tried to get this under control, and they've also shrunk the size of the government, but we're still spending way too fast.
And again, we've, of course, been hearing about fraud in various states. Of course, one that's been front and center has been Minnesota, but of course it talks about also strong reason to believe, according to a fact sheet came from the White House, in California, Illinois, New York, Maine, Colorado, to mention a few. But a lot of this has to do with some of the Medicaid and Medicare fraud.
Right.
And you've written about this for some time.
Right. And Medicaid and Medicare fraud, there's ways that the states can game the system in order to be able to get more money for that. So it's not just individuals. In some ways, it's the states. Congress has tried to push back on that. In fact, there was a time a while back where Senator Phil Gramm tried to keep wealthy people who are seniors from putting their assets into trust so that the family could use Medicaid to put them in a nursing home. And Senator Gramm was going to try to end that practice, and the liberals came up and called it the throw granny all over the cliff law. So that killed that effort because it just sounded so bad. But yes, the efforts to try to get control of government spending, and they are now saying, Trump has now said and implied that if we could get control of all the fraud, we might be able to reduce the deficit. Doesn't even come near close. You might be able to eliminate, even if you max out getting rid of the fraud and you saved $500 billion or so like that, $750 billion, you're still not even halfway to where you would be on the deficit for this year.
What about the one in Minnesota? Because that was an issue. We had some people that wanted to protest the fact that they were cutting off for a short period of time some of the Medicaid funding and the rest. And I didn't get into it, one, because we were in the midst of dealing with the Iran war. And number two, I wanted to get your thoughts because, again, if you look at the GAO reports, that's a Government Accountability Office, the argument is that almost half of the fraudulent loss deaths, 53%, come from Medicare and Medicaid, but there are actually 16 agencies other than them that also have improper payments. And so the fraud just seems just overwhelming, and maybe the solution isn't to just cut off funding, but at the same time, when you've got a leak in your house, the first thing you do is turn off the water, right?
The real trick is finding out where that fraud is, because there are people out there who really need the funds, but the fraudsters are so massive. And in Minneapolis, we found out you had the Somali community involved in this, and they were using autism. And autism is a good one to use on this because, you know, there are people on the autism spectrum, which may seem just essentially normal, and the others who have real problems. But when using mental health, this is something that's been an issue in health insurance for a long time. We knew this in the past. They wanted to try to pass health insurance to make health insurance as generous as traditional physical medical insurance. But you could go, we saw this from some of the mental health clinics and hospitals. If your insurance covered you for 2 weeks, you went in, at 2 weeks, you were cured, because your insurance ended at that point. And so that's
a miracle.
It's a miracle.
And that's why
you can't pay anymore. It's a miracle.
And I've said this for years. It's easier to tell when a bone is healed than when a mind is healed.
Right.
And so you can use the mental health issues. You can use, you can just maximize fraud for this. And in Minneapolis, apparently there were centers that were supposed to be taking kids in who had autism. And the guy, I can't remember the guy's name, the independent reporter going by taking film.
Smiling,
Nope, nobody there. This person is getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there's nobody there. And they apparently worked with some of the families and even some doctors to sort of move this scheme along. And getting to the good news is the Department of Justice says it's going to try to get control of this, but it's got a really, really big job ahead of it.
I mean, and I think it's worth underscoring. I mean, if the Government Accountability Office is saying we're losing, and I get that it doesn't solve the problem, but that's still
a lot of money.
Yeah, we're between $233 to $521 billion that people are defrauding our government, which also points to the thing we're doing way too much. If you can get away with that.
Yeah.
And one of the ways you can see this happening is whenever we hit a recession, the number of children with disabilities rises significantly. As parents go and find out how you go to the doctor, you get a claim for that, and then you file on the federal government, and you start getting various types of welfare because your child has disabilities. But you see the numbers go up as soon as the recession hits, and you know that's just not an accident.
Yeah. It reminds me, this is a quick story, it reminds me when I was a very young lawyer working at a big firm here in Dallas. We used to defend Wet n Wild. Which was a water park that you guys probably remember out near the ballpark, and so we would defend them, and so we would hire private investigators to follow. And I'm telling you, almost every time, not every time, but almost every time, we found the guy who supposedly couldn't work and had this because he got injured at the park, was out playing tennis, was out doing all these activities. So, I mean, we have a culture. I mean, this is a culture problem, right?
Yes, it is.
We have a culture problem that no one thinks that it's wrong to take, to do the things that we've heard about in Minnesota. And and the magnitude is I mean, this is just tremendous.
We had the problem here in Texas about 10 years ago where a dentist who were providing pediatric orthodontics, braces for children, low-income children. We in Texas were spending more on pediatric orthodontics than all the other states combined.
And I remember that, and that was braces for everyone,
braces
right?
For everyone.
You come in, oh yeah, braces. Come in, yeah, everybody.
And the person who owned the clinic that was doing so many of these had a water park in his backyard, and the government didn't find this out. The news media did. A person leaked it to the news media, and the ABC affiliate sent a helicopter over and looked at this huge backyard saying, my goodness, Medicaid people must be doing fairly well these days because he had a water park behind this mansion.
And I did want to bring that up because I want people to recognize we're not just picking on the blue states, because you have examples from Florida.
Sure.
We just mentioned, of course, one from Texas, and that's the problem. Well, we need to take a break, but when we come back, I'll see if we can solve some of our phone calls and take a few more if you'd like to join us. But if not, we will certainly get into some other issues before the end of the program today. Again, you can find some of these articles, especially the second coming of Doge. If you say, well, you've been rattling off some of those numbers, but I'd like to see them for myself. It's a very good piece by Cal Thomas. He's quoting from the Government Accountability Office. And of course, you had Dr. Merrill Matthews, who's written about this before. I've held up his book many times just to show you the kinds of things that are happening, unfortunately, especially in the area of Medicare and Medicaid, but that's not the only one. And as a result, there's just so much more that needs to be done. And I agree with Jeff Mateer. Maybe we're just doing entirely too much. Maybe we're spending entirely too much. You think? We'll come back with more right after this.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer, and that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, we have a couple articles, one by Jonathan Feldstein and Not the Same America, and then one by Victor Davis Hanson, Our New Ungracious Immigrants. And I put these together because I thought they had a connection, and Merrill Matthews noticed that just a minute ago as well. First one, of course, has to do with the issue of being Jewish, and I was struck by the fact that what he was saying reminded me of an interview that Bill Maher did recently with Josh Shapiro. Now, Josh Shapiro, as many of you may know, is the governor of the state of Pennsylvania, and is Jewish. And they spent some time talking about, and then later also had a couple of other individuals as well on there talking about the fact that this is a bigger problem and has been a problem for some time in the Democratic Party. It's becoming a problem in the Republican Party. But here's what Jonathan says. In the America in which I was born, Jews did not need to have armed guards to pray, send their kids to school, go shopping, or take public transportation. Yes, there was anti-Semitism and discrimination. He goes through some of those examples. But then after giving you his own story, he says that's all changed, possibly forever. That the country in which I was born, raised, educated, and loved so much has allowed anti-Semitism to become so permissible, the greatest country on the earth, with the most opportunity for the most people of all backgrounds, marks its own demise. And he just talks about the tremendous amount of anti-Semitism, and even makes a distinction between anti-Zionism. I understand there may be a difference there. And then gives us comments. I love this. Modern Nazi and misogynist Nick Fuentes could lynch Candace Owens as a black woman, but now on the same side, along with Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly. And he makes some comments about them, which we'll leave for you to read. But it illustrates, again, a point that you've made before, Dr. Matthews, and that is, we're seeing some people that we used to at least quote positively or sometimes even interview on the program who now are saying some things that we just can't believe are coming out of their mouths.
And you kind of wonder if Tucker leaving Fox just sort of opened the door for him to not have any gatekeepers on him anymore. I don't know. I stopped listening to him a while back, even before he left Fox. But you know what he's talking about there is we're seeing people going down in a street and attacking a bagel shop which has a Jewish person there, but that person may not have anything to do with Israel, Zion, or Zionism or anything of that nature. It's just a bagel shop. And we're just seeing these kinds of attacks emerge. And his point was there may have been discrimination, but we were essentially safe in being able to go to school, go to work, and do other things. And they can't say that anymore. And we've seen, my goodness, in New York and some of the cities, people chasing Jews at one of the colleges where they had to go lock themselves in the... And even though this was against Jews, it was also against conservatives. You know, Riley Gaines would be chased if she's going to speak at some place. Liberals would get up and chase her around, and they had to bring security in to sort of protect her. So something's happened on the left that I don't understand, and it's not good, and I don't know. The left has not, I don't think, has gotten rid of this yet. I don't know if they're going to be able to control it, but it's a real problem for the left. Josh Shapiro might have been good enough to put Kamala Harris over the line if he had been the nominee or even the vice presidential nominee in there. It didn't. But they couldn't. We knew he was out because he was Jewish.
That's just that was a mark against him. Even though he probably had a better communication ability and a pretty good record to run on. You have family in Pennsylvania.
I've got family, and actually, know Governor Shapiro because we worked on some things together, and clearly disagree with him on 98% of his policy, but he's extremely articulate and a passionate. I mean, I hope they never put him on a national ticket because I think he could succeed at that level. I think Dr. Matthews is onto something because I do think there is obviously the threats against Jews who certainly against Jews and physically have never been more prevalent than they are now. And we see that in our cases at First Liberty. I mean, we have more Jewish cases than we've ever had.
That's right. I want you to bring that up.
In the history. But I also think about, and you made this point as well, and I think it's important underscoring, it's just the climate. The climate right now. I know for us at First Liberty, I mean, just in the last 2 days, I don't know if I should be sharing this or not, but especially since Kerby's in the same office building as us, but we've had 2 threats. And I take it's because Kelly's involvement on the Religious Liberty Commission. I don't know that. It's not necessarily tied to that, but it's certainly. And, of course, for our events now, I mean, I was literally sitting through, and we were here off the air talking about one of the events that's coming up for First Liberty. Well, part of what I was doing is talking about the security that we're going to have at that event and making sure that we have and you will see when you attend. There'll be lots of security there.
I'm planning to be there.
Lots of security because this is the world we now live in. And when you get, again, I don't give much credence to these threats, but at the same time, we have to take them serious. They're probably just from a crackpot, but that doesn't mean we don't go. And for those who send them to us, I don't think anybody listening on Point of View are sending us those. But if they are, you know what? You know, they're being sent to the FBI. I mean, that's where they go. And I do think that we have to be careful. But there is it's the climate out there. I don't know if it's ever been like this where you can't. You have a speaker and speakers shouted down and violence occurring and obviously what we saw in the last week or so in Michigan and with the school in Virginia. I mean, it seems like every week there's something more. So it's extremely troubling. And I don't hear a lot of people on the left or center left, the more reasonable, really speaking out against some of this other than apparently Josh Shapiro, which makes sense.
And Kelly, Kerby, you and I are old enough to know when I was in college and there was a speaker that you disagreed with, we were eager to go sit and hear what he had to say. I mean, I want to hear what he has to say. You may raise a question or something like that, but there wasn't antagonism. You went to listen to somebody else. What I do think will be interesting is I think it's a somewhat open secret that one of the potential Democratic presidential candidates is Rahm Emanuel. So you have a very Jewish person with a lot of experience. I think he was a congressman, chief of staff for Barack Obama, the mayor of Chicago, and I think the ambassador to China, if I remember right.
Japan.
Was it Japan?
Yeah.
Well, that maybe Japan. But anyway, he's writing pieces in the Wall Street Journal frequently. He is speaking. He's very articulate. He's very knowledgeable. He's got to know every big donor in the Democratic Party, but he's Jewish. So it will be interesting to see if he is able to sort of garner the kind of support that an awful lot of, I won't say progressive, an awful lot of Democrats right now would not want to see.
Let me just mention, we're coming to a break in just a minute, but the other piece that connects only so well is the piece by Victor Davis Hanson, Our Ungracious Immigrants. Now, some of these attacks aren't necessarily against Jewish people, but they just illustrate again what has transpired. We're here coming to the end of March, but the first part of March, we had an individual who was a naturalized U.S. citizen from Senegal who shot up a beer garden in Austin, Texas. A few days later, you had two individuals who were portrayed at the time as CNN as just some teenagers having some fun from Pennsylvania in New York City, but they were trying to throw IEDs, fortunately poorly made, right outside of a protest in Gracie Mansion. And they really wanted this to be something like the Boston Marathon when you had, of course, those two Czech immigrant brothers that did kill so many individuals. 3 individuals injured hundreds at the Boston Marathon. Then in the week of March 12th, just a while ago, you had another naturalized citizen from Sierra Leone that goes into an ROTC teaching. It was actually in the business school because I have a friend that actually went to that same school, but it was an ROTC meeting, shoots that individual, the lieutenant colonel, on the same day. If you haven't already picked up that, you also have another naturalized U.S. citizen born in Lebanon, drives his car rigged with explosive fireworks into Temple, Israel in West Bloomfield, Michigan. Are you starting to get the idea that this isn't just against Jewish people, but it's a broader kind of issue, isn't it?
I mean, absolutely, and you know, Victor Davis Hanson does it so well. But it's like, why do you want to be here if you want to? I mean, why come here and do this?
And of course, his key point is years ago, immigrants were so thrilled to be able to come to the United States, to be able to come here, begin starting a life, and hope to be able to create a much better life for themselves. They were thankful for the country to be able to give them that freedom.
And when we come back from the break, I'll read that first couple of paragraphs because it helps us remind at least our younger listeners what it used to be like when individuals would get off the boat or they would get off of an airplane, and many of them would just kiss the ground and just came out to be some of the most hyper-patriotic people you can imagine. But things have changed, and we'll come back and talk about that right after this.
Planned Parenthood affiliates are getting creative in the face of the loss of taxpayer funding. In a 6-3 decision last June, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that states can exclude Planned Parenthood from their Medicaid programs on the basis that the organization provides abortions. This imperils the organization's presence in conservative states. Soon thereafter, Congress passed and the President signed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which bars Medicaid funding for tax-exempt organizations that perform abortions. For decades, federal law has almost completely banned federal funding of abortion. But the new legislation prevents Medicaid funds from going to groups that provide contraception and other services if they also perform abortions and receive more than $800,000 Medicaid dollars annually. Chief among these organizations is Planned Parenthood. Reporting a $100 million revenue gap, Planned Parenthood's national office has laid off staff and closed 50 clinics last year, many in states with permissive abortion laws. The Wall Street Journal reports that in an effort to keep the doors open, the organization's largest affiliate, Planned Parenthood Mar Monte, which operates clinics in Northern California and Nevada, is overhauling its business model with a slate of new services. The clinics are now offering Botox injections and IV hydration. They're looking at adding laser hair removal and cosmetic filler treatments. Mar Monte leaders told the Journal these added services fit with a larger mission of promoting bodily autonomy. Patients pay cash for these aesthetic treatments. The clinics can charge significantly less than your typical med spa and still make a nice profit. They don't need cushy surroundings. Ladies can get their hydration IVs in the same recliners where patients recover from having a pregnancy terminated. Mar Monte leaders told the Journal they hope these unconventional offerings, such as Botox and lip and cheek fillers, will generate enough revenue to subsidize the health care Planned Parenthood is best known for. That would be abortion. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, one of the articles we have there is Victor Davis Hanson, our new ungracious immigrants. But as I pointed out, if anything, it begins by talking about how we so appreciate those who are here as immigrants and have come here legally. He says Silicon Valley was energized by legal immigrants from all over the world who founded eBay, Google, NVIDIA, SpaceX, Stripe, Sun Microsystems, Tesla, Yahoo, and a host of others. Reminds us of a 1963 film, America, which you may or may not be familiar with it, but the film, as he says, summed up America's traditional views of immigrants. They had risked everything for the chance to reach America once they became hyper-patriotic in their gratitude for the magnanimity of its new host. And I just think it illustrates again, as he points out a little bit later, something has gone wrong with this issue of immigration. And in particular, those who have come from certain parts of the world. They may be Middle Eastern students. They may have been those who overstayed their visa from some of these Middle Eastern countries. You have had all sorts of problems, everything from 9/11 in this country to October 7th, 2023 in Hamas attacking Israel. And as a result, I think we have to pay attention to the fact that even though there are lots of peace-loving Muslims in the world, I was talking with one of them today, as a matter of fact, on our walk. There are also some that have a much more virulent ideology and really threaten the United States of America and the world.
And what they've brought to our country. I live in an area that has a lot of Indian population. The schools are extremely good because they are so dedicated to be able to get good grades going into the sciences. Asians also as well. So they've brought a lot to the country. And very grateful to be able to come here and be able to achieve what they've wanted to achieve. But you do have some people, and this is, I think it's mostly in the Muslim category, who have come here and they've just they either take advantage or they in the Somalian area in Minneapolis, engaging in fraud and other things. Russians have also been a problem because they've brought some of the gangs here. So it's been a problem in some areas, but the vast majority of immigrants have just been so helpful to the country in moving us forward.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, we describe America as a melting pot, right?
Sure.
Of we've all come. I guess if we traced each of our ancestors, we might have something in common. But generally, we're different. You do your Dutch stuff, right?
My wife does the Dutch stuff. Her grandfather came over from Holland on a boat and arrived about 1906.
Right, and so Anderson probably English. You've got some English. Mine is some Scottish and German. So we come, but it's a melting pot. But we came together, and melting implies that you kind of leave some and you come together. And Speaker Johnson mentioned this, I think, a couple weeks ago, and he got criticized for it. And basically the lack of assimilation.
Yes.
And
That's
what has made America great is we come and we assimilated together because we came with this great belief in, the belief in American values and American ideals. And we've stopped doing that. We don't teach civics anymore in public schools. And so we're not assimilating anymore, and people come. And I think we're seeing in Europe where this has happened because you've had this influx of, especially for Muslim countries. And you've got towns. Someone this week was telling me this town in France is 80% Muslim now. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not, and it's unlike any other place in France. Well, of course it's not. And so, because if you're not assimilating in American culture, and it's great, obviously, we fight for religious liberty. It's great to have your religious beliefs, but there's got to be some sort in common. And because we're not teaching civics, we need to be teaching civics. We all grew up in that. The schools that we went to, public schools, right, are not the same today, and they're letting people be. And I was really struck, and I think you've had her. Have you had Ayan Harasi Ali on?
I was just
about
to
her
say
book,
that.
Infidel.
There's a Somalian.
And Somalian
turned out very well.
But she talks about when she immigrated to the Netherlands, how the Netherlands were basically said, well, just let them be, let them be and do their own thing, even if it was contrary to, and that's a problem. And I think we're in America, we're suffering from that too. And that's why you have these and a lot of times second generation, sometimes first generation, they don't believe in the America that certainly that our founders believed in. So I'm on my soapbox, but I do think it's a major problem, and I do think Speaker Johnson described this. And the left just criticized him. How dare you say that's un-American? No, it's very American.
Very American.
And let me add, one of the reasons when Victor Davis Hanson is talking about the older generation of immigrants, there wasn't a welfare system set up to take advantage of. There were public schools, but there wasn't a welfare system so that you come in and feel like, well, I'm low income, so therefore I need to get food stamps, I need to get Medicaid, I need to get all these other things. And if you don't give them to me, you're somehow discriminating. And if they are taking advantage of the system, and this happened in Minneapolis, the powers that be did not want to speak out about that because they would be perceived as being a racist and saying, we're not sure that you're using this Medicaid system and autism right.
Yes. Well, and again, the criminal issue, I love at the end, he talks about the fact that why do we have so many criminals believe they can enter the United States illegally and sometimes get away with all the crimes? Well, maybe it's because they feel contempt for any nation that opens its borders, requires no background checks, destroys its own immigration laws, and weaponizes its criminal justice system to make the criminal the victim and the state the victimizer. And that's become an issue as well, because if you're bringing people from countries, for example, I'll just pick on Africa for a minute, where corruption is rampant, and that's really a way of life, you don't come and adopt the American way of life, you import those ideas from those countries. Right. And so I think we understand that as well. So Victor Davis Hanson, as usual, goes on for many pages. It's 10 pages if you print it out, but it has all sorts of great insight. But just as we're winding down, I always like to talk about prayer targets for First Liberty, but actually maybe we just celebrate the fact that you've got some great news that if somebody wasn't listening at the beginning, you won the Supreme Court case 9-0.
Yeah, we're just praising God that in a very divided country, we win at the Supreme Court 9-0 on behalf of an evangelist. And so that, we're very, very much. The prayer request would be the other case that we mentioned. If we pray for Miss Castro and her case now being heard by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, the school teacher who was told she couldn't have her cross by her desk.
Yes.
Apparently First Liberty is the only institution in the country that can bring the left and right together these days.
Well, I mean, it just tells you how God, nothing's impossible with God, and we're living that.
Even getting liberal votes.
Yes. Yeah. And again, Elena Kagan writing the majority opinion. Who could have made that up? She used to be Solicitor General, if I remember right.
She was
quite a liberal progressive in many ways. But
Harvard professor,
very
and
good.
So when you win, when you get Kagan, Jackson, Sotomayor,
it's either great or you're suspicious.
Well, it tells you how wrong religious liberty has been misinterpreted in the past.
And again, the article in the New York Times, maybe I'll post that for Monday, but you can find it right now. And they made First Liberty Institute looking pretty good. So you never know what you're going to get when the mainstream press covers you. But
I don't know what our friend Cal Thomas will say.
Anyway, we are winding down. Next week is our Truth Team Week. I hope that you will be with us as we talk with so many gifted individuals, as well as bring bring to you the need for us to continue have you supporting this ministry so we can keep bringing these programs to you. As always, I want to thank Megan for her help engineering the program. It's good to have Steve back. Thank you for producing the program. If you find yourself wanting to know more about some of the issues we've been talking about today, it's all available at the website at pointofview.net. There is a banner there, which we'll be talking about next week on our Truth Team, so take the time to look at that. Enjoy the weekend. Maybe watch some basketball. See you back here on Monday on Point of View.
Data reveals that more Americans are interested in reading the Bible again, but they also have difficulty applying what they read to contemporary issues. That's because most Americans don't actually hold a biblical worldview, even if they identify as Christians. A biblical worldview understands that the Bible holds the truth, and that truth illuminates every part of life, including every current problem that we worry about today. Point of View's Truth Team has helped Americans make sense of complicated contemporary issues in light of biblical truth for over 50 years. And next week, starting March 23rd, Point of View will be highlighting the impact that you can have when you join the Truth Team. Help Americans find truth and live by it. Learn more by visiting pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.